The wind came down from the Bitterroot Mountains like a warning. It cut across Bear Valley, rattling the loose boards of the Whitaker farmhouse and driving a thin sheet of snow against the windows, even though winter was still weeks away. Clara May Whitaker stood at the edge of the front pasture, her boots sinking into frozen mud, staring at the line of men on horseback waiting near the fence. They were not ranch hands. They were not neighbors. They were there for the land. Her father's land. The lead rider dismounted first. He wore a long wool coat, city-made, unsuited for Montana weather, and gloves so clean they looked like they had never touched soil. He glanced at his pocket watch before looking up at her with mild impatience, as if she were already late for something she had never agreed to attend. "Miss Whitaker," he said, "we're authorized to assess the property today. If the balance isn't settled by the end of the week, foreclosure proceedings will begin." Clara felt the words strike her chest like a physical blow. Foreclosure. The sound of it echoed louder than the wind, louder than the nervous stamping of the horses behind him. "You were told to wait," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "My father isn't well." The man smiled thinly. "Illness doesn't pause debt." Behind her, the farmhouse door creaked open. Amos Whitaker stepped onto the porch, his frame thinner than it had been even a year ago, his shoulders stooped, as though the land itself had begun pressing him into the earth. He leaned heavily on the doorframe, one hand over his chest. Clara turned just in time to see him sway. "Papa," she said, rushing back toward him. By the time she reached the porch, his knees had buckled. She caught him before he fell, her arms straining under his weight, panic flaring sharp and hot in her throat. The men by the fence watched in silence. One of them cleared his throat, uncomfortable but unmoved. Inside, Clara eased her father into the worn armchair by the cold stove. His breathing was shallow, uneven. "I told you not to come out," she whispered, brushing the snow from his hair. "I couldn't let them talk to you alone," Amos murmured. "This was my doing." Clara swallowed. This was always how it went. He took the blame. She carried the consequences. A knock came at the door. Firm, unyielding. Before she could answer, another figure appeared on the porch, tall, spare, wrapped in a dark coat, dusted with snow. Unlike the men at the fence, this one removed his hat when he stepped inside. His hair was iron gray, his face lined not by bitterness, but by years of listening more than speaking. "Reverend Boone," Clara said softly. Reverend Silas Boone nodded to her, then glanced at Amos with concern. "I came as soon as I heard." Heard what Clara asked, though she already sensed the shape of the answer. Silas closed the door behind him, shutting out the wind. "That the bank's patience has run out, and that another option has been offered." The room felt suddenly smaller. Clara straightened. Another option. Silas hesitated. He had baptized Clara, buried her mother, watched her grow from a barefoot girl racing through tall grass into a woman who carried too much on her shoulders. "There's a man," he said carefully. "A rancher." Clara let out a humorless breath. "There's always a man." "This one is different," Silas said. "Wyatt Langford." The name landed with weight. Even Clara, who rarely left Bear Valley, had heard it. Langford Ranch stretched for miles along the high plains. Cattle timber rail contracts. Money that did not flicker and vanish like mining fortunes, but stayed, grew, endured. Her father stirred. "Langford," he whispered. He's rich." "Yes," Silas said. "And private. He doesn't involve himself in local troubles unless he chooses to." Clara crossed her arms. "So why us?" Silas met her gaze. Because he wants a wife. The word hung between them heavy and unreal. No, Clara said at once. Whatever this is, the answer is no. Silas did not argue. He only reached into his coat and removed a folded document, placing it gently on the table as though it might shatter if dropped. He will assume your family's debt in full, Silas said. The land remains in your father's name until his passing. Your parents will receive a yearly allowance. In return, you marry him. Clara laughed. It came out sharp, brittle. That's not a proposal. That's a transaction. Yes, Silas said quietly. It is. Amos struggled upright. Clara, don't. She turned on him. You don't get to say anything about this. Not after promising Mother you'd never gamble the land. Not after swearing we were safe. His face crumpled. I was trying to fix it. And now you're selling me instead, she said, then immediately hated herself for the cruelty of it. Silas stepped forward. Clara, he made his terms clear. This would be a marriage of convenience, respect, security, no expectations beyond that. No love, Clara said flatly. Silas didn't deny it. She moved to the window, staring out at the frozen pasture, at the men still waiting by the fence like vultures with ledgers instead of talons. This land was her childhood, her mother's garden, her father's pride. If it was taken, there would be nothing left to fight for. Behind her, her father began to cough harsh and rattling. Clara closed her eyes. She had known this moment would come. Not this way, perhaps. Not with a name like Langford attached to it. But the world had been narrowing for years, options quietly disappearing one by one until only one narrow path remained. She turned back to Silas. When she asked, he exhaled relief and sorrow tangled together. Friday. He'll come himself. Amos shook his head weakly. Clara, you don't have to. She went to him and knelt, taking his weathered hands in hers. Yes, she said softly. I do. Her voice did not break. She would not give it that satisfaction. Silas watched her for a long moment, then nodded. If you say yes, the debt disappears, he said gently. You don't have to choose Clara, but you still will. That night, long after the men had ridden away and the house had settled into uneasy quiet, Clara sat alone at the kitchen table. The lamp flickered. The contract lay unopened before her. She did not read it. She did not need to. Instead, she stared at the door, half expecting it to open again, half dreading that it would. Somewhere out there, beyond Bear Valley, beyond the thin line of her former life, a man named Wyatt Langford was expecting an answer he already assumed he would receive. On Friday, he would come for her, and Clara May Whitaker, who had never once been chosen in her life, would step into a marriage she did not want to save everything she could not bear to lose. Outside, the wind howled again, stronger this time, as if the valley itself were warning her, or welcoming what was coming next. The road to Langford Ranch was nothing like Clara imagined. It climbed in long, narrow curves, hugging the base of the mountains like a thread stitched through rough fabric. The wagon jolted with every rock and rut, but Clara barely noticed. Her hands were clenched in her lap, wrapped tightly around the gloves she wasn't wearing. The silence between her and Reverend Silas was thick, but not uncomfortable. He'd offered to accompany her at Wyatt's request, or maybe at her father's. She wasn't sure anymore who was making decisions for her, only that it wasn't her. Silas cleared his throat gently. You don't have to be afraid of him, Clara. She didn't look away from the trees, their branches like black ribs against the gray sky. I'm not afraid, she said. I just don't know how to be invisible and still be seen. Silas didn't respond. He understood what she meant. When the ranch finally came into view, Clara forgot to breathe. It wasn't a house. It was a kingdom. Set against the mountain's shoulder, Langford Ranch stretched across the horizon. The main lodge was 2 stories of hand-hewn logs trimmed with dark stone and clean lines, as if it had been drawn by someone who understood permanence. A wide porch wrapped around the front like open arms that didn't quite know how to embrace. To the left were corrals and stables, massive and orderly. To the right, the faint outline of bunkhouses, barns, and smoke drifting upward from chimneys. Everything was clean, functional, and eerily quiet. Not lifeless, just disciplined. Wyatt Langford was already waiting. He stood at the top of the porch steps, tall and still, his silhouette stark against the sky. He didn't come down to meet the wagon. He didn't wave. As Clara climbed down her boots, meeting the frost-hardened earth, she felt the weight of his gaze settle over her like snow on bare skin, quiet, cold, and impossible to shake. She reached the steps and met his eyes. He nodded once. Mrs. Langford. Not Clara. Not Miss Whitaker. The name sounded like an obligation stamped in ink. She answered calmly. Mr. Langford. He gestured toward the open door. Come inside. It's cold. Inside the lodge was warmer than she expected, but not cozier. The fireplace was lit, casting long orange shadows across the floor, but the room itself was spare efficient. Thick rugs, sturdy furniture, no decorations, nothing soft, except the woman standing near the hearth. This is Mrs. Nellie Hart, Wyatt said. She runs the household. The older woman had a face made for disapproval, square jaw eyes, sharp as fence nails, and a mouth that seemed reluctant to curve into anything resembling a smile. She curtsied. Barely. Welcome, ma'am. I've prepared your quarters as requested. Requested by whom, Clara didn't ask. Wyatt turned to her. You'll find the house orderly. I expect things to stay that way. If there's anything missing, Mrs. Hart will handle it. She nodded. Of course. He studied her for a moment. His dark hair was wind-tossed, but otherwise he looked the same as he had the day of their wedding, precise, remote, as if nothing inside him had shifted at all. But then why would it? He hadn't married for love or companionship. He hadn't even married for children. He'd married for convenience, and she'd agreed. He motioned toward the wide staircase. I'll show you to your rooms. Rooms, plural. She followed him up the stairs, her footsteps muted by thick wool rugs. The hallway was long with tall windows overlooking the hills and distant river, and at the far end he paused before 2 doors, one on the right, one directly across. He opened the right. This will be your suite. The room was larger than the entire lower floor of her childhood home. A 4-poster bed, carved dresser, a fireplace that already held burning logs, and beside the window a writing desk with blank stationery stacked neatly. She stepped inside, absorbing the stillness. It's lovely, she said, because it was what she was expected to say. He pointed to the door opposite hers. That's my room. You can knock if something's urgent. She turned, meeting his gaze. And if something's not urgent, Wyatt's face didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, a hesitation maybe, or the thought of a line he didn't want blurred. Then I'd ask you not to knock. There it was. The rule beneath the arrangement. They would live side by side, not together. She walked toward the window, placing her hand on the cold pane. Outside, snow had begun to fall again. Behind her, he said, I'm not a man who makes promises I don't intend to keep. She turned slightly. This arrangement benefits us both, he continued. You have security. Your family has protection. I have a household that functions properly. That's all I ask. No pretense, no performance, no expectations. Clara's voice was soft but clear. We don't need love to live together, do we, Mr. Langford? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She turned back to the window and heard the door close behind him. That evening, Clara sat alone at the small table in the corner of her room, untouched dinner, cooling in front of her. Mrs. Hart had delivered it herself, her lips pressed in a firm line, her expression unreadable. No words exchanged. Clara's fingers toyed with the edge of the napkin, mind reeling back to her father, his trembling hands, his hollowed-out face when she kissed him goodbye. He'd tried to be brave. He'd failed. So had she. But now she was here. Married to a man who looked at her as if she were another fixture in the house. Maybe that was fair. After all, she hadn't married him either. She had married the contract. The chair creaked as she stood and crossed the room to the window once more. Darkness had settled over the ranch like a heavy quilt. A few lamps still glowed near the barns. Somewhere out there, Wyatt was likely overseeing stock counts or equipment repairs or ranch ledgers, all things more predictable than a wife. She pressed her hand against the cold glass. We don't need love to live together, she whispered, as if saying it aloud made it more true. But her reflection stared back solemn and unconvinced. She turned away and walked to the fire. The warmth licked at her fingers, but the chill inside her bones remained. Outside, snow fell heavier now, a quiet reminder that storms often came slowly, one flake at a time. Across the hall, Wyatt Langford stood at his own window, untouched, drink in hand, watching the same storm. He should have felt relief. The arrangement was done. The contract was signed. The wife was in the house. But instead, something unsettled churned low in his chest, a feeling he hadn't invited and didn't have the words for. He downed the drink in a single swallow. Behind him, the fire cracked. Tomorrow, they'd begin the routine. Schedules, expectations, structure. But tonight, she was just there, in his house, in his life, whether he was ready or not. And beyond the window, the snow kept falling. The hallway turned colder as Clara moved down it. Langford Ranch was oddly silent for such a large place. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, it was watchful. Every step Clara took echoed faintly against the wood-paneled walls, as if the house itself was keeping track of her movements. It had been 3 days since she arrived. 3 days of breakfasts taken alone. Of passing Wyatt on the stairs and exchanging nothing but nods. Of hearing his voice only when absolutely necessary. She had unpacked, walked the grounds, memorized the shape of the land from her window. But still the house and the man who owned it remained an enigma wrapped in discipline. Today, restless, she decided to explore. Wyatt hadn't given her any restrictions. He hadn't given her anything really beyond a room, a name, and the unspoken expectation that she would stay out of the way. The east wing was dimmer than the rest of the house, with tall, arched windows that looked out onto the pastures. A long runner muffled her steps, and portraits lined the hallway, stoic men and somber women, ancestors, who looked carved from the same rock as the mountains. Near the end of the corridor, Clara reached a door that stood slightly ajar. Odd. The rest of the house had been shut tight, precise to the point of discomfort. She glanced behind her, then pushed it open. The room beyond took her breath away. Not because it was grand, it wasn't, but because it was forgotten. Dust danced in the beams of light coming through the tall windows. A piano sat in the center, angled toward the sun, its surface veiled in a fine layer of gray. Bookshelves lined the walls, half filled with volumes of music and poetry. A velvet chair by the fire untouched. A vase on the mantel, dry, brittle stems still in it, long dead. No footprints on the rug. No recent life. Clara stepped inside, the air shifting around her, like a held breath finally released. The piano called to her. It was an old Steinway, the kind people built houses around. Her fingers itched to lift the lid to test the keys, but she hesitated. This room felt like it belonged to someone who hadn't returned in a long, long time. And yet no one had said a word about it. Not Mrs. Hart. Not Wyatt. Especially not Wyatt. She brushed her hand along the polished wood clearing, a trail through the dust, and slowly opened the lid. Her reflection stared back at her in the black lacquer. She placed her fingers gently on the keys. They were cool, silent. She pressed one. The note rang out, clear, resonant, startling in its purity. Clara closed her eyes and let her hands move cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. She played from memory a piece her mother had taught her when she was barely tall enough to reach the pedals. And for the first time in days, something inside her breathed. The music swelled, filled the room, wrapped around her like a forgotten shawl. She played without thinking, without worrying about who might hear, because for once she hoped someone would. And someone did. The door creaked open behind her, and she turned, fingers still poised on the keys, to find Wyatt standing in the doorway. He didn't speak, just stared. His expression was unreadable. Not angry, not exactly surprised, just distant, as if he were looking at something he'd tried very hard to bury. Clara stood slowly. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said. The door was open. Wyatt stepped inside, his boots silent against the rug. His eyes never left the piano. "This room hasn't been opened in 10 years, he said quietly. Clara's brow creased. "Why?" He glanced at her, then away. "Because no one was supposed to open it." She watched him for a long moment, then said, "It doesn't feel abandoned. Just waiting." Wyatt walked to the window and looked out. Snow still clung to the hills. His voice was low when he finally spoke again. "My wife used to play." A pause. This was her room. Clara understood then. The dust, the silence, the untouched vase. Her name was Catherine, wasn't it? He nodded. "Was she good?" Clara asked gently. He looked down. She was beautiful when she played, like it was the only time she remembered how to be alive. Clara stepped back from the piano, folding her arms. "If this room belongs to her, I won't come again." Wyatt turned to her, and his eyes, always so composed, looked almost uncertain. "You play like you remember how to be alive, too." She blinked. It wasn't a compliment. Not exactly. But it wasn't cold either. It was something else. Something closer to truth. He walked slowly to the piano and rested his hand on the lid, then glanced at her. "I hated hearing music after she died," he said. "I told myself it was better silent. Safer." Clara said nothing. He looked at her again, longer this time. But maybe silence is a kind of death too. She let the words hang, then asked softly, "So which one hurts less now, the music or the quiet?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back, nodded once, and left the room, his footsteps light but sure. The door didn't close behind him. That night, Clara sat at her desk, quill in hand, journal open. She wrote slowly, her thoughts tangled. She had touched something today. Not just the piano, something deeper. Wyatt Langford was not made of stone, but his edges were sharp, and she had to wonder what kind of woman had once lived in that room, what kind of wound her absence had left, that even a single song could reopen it after 10 years. The fire snapped in the hearth. Somewhere below, boots creaked across the main hall floor. Wyatt, perhaps, always moving, always working, like if he stopped something inside him would catch up. She looked out her window. The snow had stopped, but the house still felt buried. She closed her journal and walked to the window, placing a hand against the cold pane. Behind her, the piano waited in its room. She didn't know if she was allowed to return, but she knew she would. Because as much as Wyatt hated what the music woke up, he hadn't told her to stop. And sometimes silence wasn't safe at all. The next morning, Clara returned to the music room. She waited until the breakfast dishes had been cleared, until Wyatt's boots echoed down the front steps on his way to the south pasture. Then, barefoot on the rug to quiet her steps, she slipped through the east wing and opened the door without hesitation. The dust hadn't settled again. That surprised her more than it should have. It meant the room had been entered touched since she'd left yesterday. She walked to the piano and didn't hesitate this time. Her fingers found the keys like they remembered her. The melody came softer today, less like declaration, more like confession. Somewhere during the second song she felt it, that sense of being watched. She didn't stop, didn't even look toward the door. If Wyatt was there again, he would speak, or he wouldn't. Either way, this wasn't about him. This was for her. After a full hour, she stood, stretched her arms, and moved to the shelves along the wall. She traced the spines of books covered in a thin film of neglect, volumes of Chopin Debussy folk arrangements, all annotated in a woman's neat looping script. Catherine's hand, no doubt. She paused at a weathered red notebook tucked between two hymnals. When she opened it, she found not music, but memories. Pages of musings, mundane, poetic melancholy. He barely looks at me anymore. I thought building this house together would feel like a beginning. Instead, it feels like he's locking me in with every wall. Clara closed the notebook quickly. She shouldn't be reading this, but she already had. That night, Mrs. Hart brought Clara's dinner as usual. A bowl of thick stew, a chunk of rye bread, a glass of milk. But this time the housekeeper lingered. "You've been going into the east room," Mrs. Hart said flatly. Clara didn't deny it. The door was open. It's been closed for 10 years. Clara met her gaze. Then maybe it's time it wasn't. Mrs. Hart didn't nod, didn't scowl. She just looked at Clara long enough that the silence grew tight around them, and then turned on her heel and left. Clara sat by the fire and ate slowly, thoughtfully. This house didn't need a ghost. It needed something living. The next evening, just after sunset, Clara found herself walking through the dining room on her way back from the music room when she saw him. Wyatt was sitting at the long table alone, sleeves rolled up, reading over a ledger. A lamp burned low beside him. His hair was damp as though he'd just returned from the barn and scrubbed the day off with cold water. He looked tired, older. She paused, uncertain. He noticed. "You can sit," he said without looking up. She did. At the far end of the table. "I heard you playing," he added. Clara looked at him carefully. "I figured." A pause. "I haven't heard music in that room since the day I closed it," he said. She leaned back slightly. "Why didn't you lock the door?" He finally looked at her. "Because I didn't want to admit I couldn't go in." Her voice was quiet. "And now I still haven't gone in. You stood in the doorway." "That's not the same." She studied him. His walls were still up, but now she could see the cracks. "You don't have to explain anything to me," she said. "But you should know I'm not her." "I know that." "Do you—" Wyatt set his pencil down. "You're not a replacement, Clara." "That's good," she said, "because I'm not the kind of woman you replace." He looked at her long enough that the silence became weighty again. Then for the first time since she arrived, he smiled. Not fully, not enough to soften his eyes, but the corner of his mouth pulled just slightly. "You're a stubborn woman, and you're a man who mistakes silence for strength." He nodded, acknowledging the blow. "I didn't think you'd stay," he said. She tilted her head. "You didn't give me the option. I meant after the first few days. Most people would have run screaming." Clara smirked. "I've lived through worse." "You're just a man in a very large house with no manners." Now the smile reached his eyes. A pause. "Then why do you play?" She took a breath. "Because it's the only time I don't feel like I have to prove anything. I'm not trying to be someone's wife or someone's daughter or someone's debt. I'm just me." He nodded. Slowly. "Catherine used to say the same thing." "I'm not her," Clara said again. "And I don't want to live like I am." That's when she said it, the words that had been building in her since the first night. "If I'm going to live in the house of a dead woman, then at least let me live in it as myself." He didn't respond right away. Finally he said, "I didn't ask you to be anything else, no. But you built your whole life around someone who's no longer here, Wyatt. And that life feels like a coffin." He didn't flinch, but he did look away. Clara stood. "I'm not trying to replace her. I don't even know who she was. But I am here. I'm breathing. And I'm not going to play the part of a memory." Then she walked away, the heels of her boots tapping firmly across the hardwood, louder than she'd ever let them be before. She spent the next day in the garden, pruning back dead stems, digging up the tangled roots that had gone unchecked. The land was tired, choked with weeds, but it wasn't hopeless. Kind of like the house, and maybe the man inside it. That afternoon she returned to the music room and opened the piano again. Her hands moved with purpose. This time she played something brighter. A reel, a fast tempo, something that dared the room to feel alive. She didn't look toward the door, but she knew he was there. Upstairs that night, Clara paced her bedroom restless. The room felt too clean, too perfect. She kicked off her shoes and walked barefoot across the rug, opened a drawer, pulled out one of the blank journals Silas had gifted her before the wedding. She opened to the first page and began to write. Not about debt, not about her father, not even about Wyatt. She wrote about the wind in the pasture, the quiet that hummed behind the music, the way grief lived in corners, and how sometimes the only way to clean a house was to shake the dust out of its oldest rooms. Across the hall, Wyatt sat at the edge of his bed, boots still on, staring at the floor. He'd heard her playing again, and again he hadn't stopped her. Because something in the way she moved through the house, careful but unapologetic, made him feel like the place was waking up after a long sleep. But that wasn't what unsettled him most. It was the way she spoke to him. Not cruel, not even bold. Just honest. She didn't flinch around his silence. She called it out. And he wasn't sure if he resented her for it, or needed her more because of it. He reached for the glass on the nightstand, took a sip, and looked toward her door. Still closed, but no longer locked in his mind. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, and clearly expensive. It sat on the silver tray in the entryway, like it had every right to be there. Clara noticed it as soon as she came in from the garden dirt, still under her fingernails, boots damp with morning frost. Mrs. Hart stood beside the tray, her hands folded, eyes unreadable. "It arrived by courier," she said stiffly. "From Helena." Clara dried her hands on her apron and picked it up. The return address read McBride Estate. The handwriting was precise, elegant. She opened it carefully. Inside was a formal invitation handwritten to the Helena Winter Social, the kind of event whispered about in smaller towns for weeks before and after. A benefit hosted at the governor's residence, attended by every wealthy rancher, judge, banker, and politician in the territory. And at the bottom in clean ink, Mrs. Tessa McBride cordially invites Mrs. Clara Langford to attend as a guest of honor to be introduced to Helena society. Clara's fingers tightened slightly around the card. She hadn't realized she was being watched that closely. "She moves fast," Wyatt said behind her. Clara turned. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression somewhere between bemused and bracing for impact. "You knew she'd reach out," Clara said. "I figured," he replied. She always did enjoy making a show of her curiosity. Clara looked down at the invitation again. "Is it a test?" Wyatt shrugged. "It's Helena." "Everything's a test." Clara took a breath. "Then I suppose I'd better show up." He raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to go." She met his gaze. "No. But I should." He nodded once, then added, "Be careful with Tessa Clara. She doesn't draw blood, unless she wants everyone to watch it drip." 2 days later, Clara stood in front of a mirror she barely recognized herself in. The gown had arrived in a box wrapped in navy ribbon, midnight blue velvet with delicate pearl beading along the cuffs. It had clearly been selected or perhaps arranged by someone familiar with Helena's social battlefield. Mrs. Hart helped zip her into it with the tight-lipped efficiency of someone who disapproved of excess, but knew better than to say so. "You clean up well," Wyatt said from the hallway as she descended the stairs. Clara looked at him. He wore a dark suit, black as ink, with a gray vest, and a watch chain glinting at his waist. His hair was slicked back, clean-shaven, but it was his eyes that caught her sharp, observant, and briefly stunned. "You don't look like someone who married for convenience," he added. Clara offered a small smile. "Maybe I didn't." They rode in silence for part of the trip. Helena's lights twinkled against the evening snow as the carriage crested the ridge. But the tension wasn't in the town. It was in Wyatt's silence. Clara broke it softly. "You've avoided this world for years, haven't you?" "I built my name to avoid needing theirs," he replied. "But they don't like what they can't control." "And me?" she asked. "Do I look controllable?" He glanced sideways. "You look like trouble in a beautiful dress." She laughed. It surprised them both. The McBride estate was lit like something out of a fairy tale. Dozens of lanterns lined the walkway, casting golden light across the snow. Inside, music swelled not simple reels, but a full-string quartet. Laughter echoed from every room. Clara's entrance didn't go unnoticed. Heads turned, voices hushed. The new Mrs. Langford had arrived. She didn't cling to Wyatt's arm. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. Measured steps, chin high, eyes clear. She was the ghost of no one. Tessa McBride found her by the main fireplace. Clara knew it was her before being introduced. A woman like that didn't need a name tag. She was tall, refined, with russet hair swept into a flawless twist, and a gown that shimmered like champagne. Her smile was pleasant, but only just. A blade wrapped in silk. "Mrs. Langford," she said sweetly, holding out a hand. You're even lovelier than the rumors said. Clara took the hand firm and direct. Mrs. McBride, thank you for the invitation. Oh, please, Tessa replied, guiding her toward the side parlor. I was dying to meet the woman who managed to do what no one else has, tie Wyatt Langford down. Is that what I've done? Tessa gave a smile so sharp it nearly sparkled. Well, you married him. That's a start. They sipped champagne while polite warfare danced between their words. Tessa leaned in. He used to be quite the enigma, you know. Until Catherine. Clara's gaze didn't flinch. Yes. I've heard of her. Of course you have. Tessa's voice dipped a note. She was unforgettable. Clara let that sit. Then coolly. So am I. For a moment the game stopped. Then Tessa laughed genuinely. Oh, I like you, she said. You have a spine. That's rare around here. Clara tilted her glass. And you like rare things, don't you? Only when I can keep them, Tessa murmured. And just like that, the message was clear. This wasn't curiosity, it was a warning. Clara smiled again, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. If you're hoping I'll be Catherine's shadow, she said, you'll be disappointed. I cast my own. Later that night, after the music slowed and the carriages began to line up in the snow, Clara stepped out onto the side terrace alone. She needed air and distance, but Wyatt was already out there. Leaning against the stone railing, he didn't turn when she approached. How bad was it, he asked. She joined him at the rail. I told her I cast my own shadow. Wyatt's mouth curved slightly. That'll do it. Clara looked out at the hills beyond. Lights twinkled below. Helena was lovely and sharp-edged. She still wants something from you, Clara said. She always does, Wyatt replied. But I don't give her anything anymore, except space to remind the world you were once hers. He looked at her, a flicker of guilt behind his eyes. She never was, he said softly. But I let people think it. It was easier than the truth. Clara tilted her head. And what is the truth? Wyatt was quiet. Then she was the woman I almost built a life with, but not the one I'd survive in it. Clara swallowed. Behind them, laughter spilled from the ballroom. The music played on. She met his eyes. Then I guess you're still deciding if you'll survive this one. He didn't answer. But he didn't look away either. The next morning, back at Langford Ranch, Clara found a new letter waiting for her on the piano bench. It was unsigned. One line only. You should ask Wyatt what really happened to Catherine. She stared at it, the ink still fresh. And in the quiet that followed, the walls of the house seemed to hold their breath again. Because maybe not all ghosts were memories. Some were secrets, and they were still very much alive. The note sat on Clara's nightstand all night. She didn't touch it after that first moment, but she didn't sleep either. She lay under the heavy quilt, staring at the ceiling, hearing every creak of the old house as if it were speaking a language only she didn't know. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The message was not. You should ask Wyatt what really happened to Catherine. That one line had curled itself under her skin like splinters. She didn't know why it rattled her so badly. Maybe because she had finally started to believe that whatever ghosts lingered in this house were just that, ghosts. Echoes, not threats. But this was someone alive, someone watching, someone who wanted her to pull a thread they knew could unravel everything. At dawn, Clara got up dressed quietly and went down to the music room. She didn't play. She just sat at the piano bench, the note folded in her lap, and stared at the keys. She was still sitting there when Wyatt walked in. He stopped in the doorway, took in the sight of her shoulders, tense, hair unpinned, eyes sharp with something that wasn't quite fear. He said nothing at first. Then gently, "You look like you've seen something you wish you hadn't." She looked up. "I got a letter." He stepped forward slowly. From who? She held it out. He took it, read the single sentence. His jaw locked, not in confusion, in recognition. "You know who sent this?" she said. "I have a guess," he replied carefully, folding the note in half and slipping it into his coat. Clara stood. "You're not going to tell me. It's not that simple." "Then simplify it." Wyatt's eyes met hers. Something in them had shifted, not anger, but a quiet, defensive ache. "She died in her sleep," he said, peacefully. "That's what I told people. That's what they needed to believe." Clara stepped closer. "And what's the part they didn't need to believe?" He paused. Then, like the words cost him something. She wasn't alone when she died. The room went still. Clara's voice was steady. "Who was with her? I was. Of course he was." He turned away, walked toward the window, his hands shoved into his coat pockets like he didn't trust them not to betray him. "She'd been getting worse for months," he said. "Mood swings, panic spells. I tried to get help, but she refused anyone from town. Said they were watching her, that they wanted to take the house." "She was sick," Clara said quietly. "Something wasn't right," Wyatt replied, "but no one had a name for it." She stopped sleeping, stopped eating. Some days she couldn't even find her way to the kitchen. Other days she played the piano like her hands remembered a world she didn't live in anymore. He looked over at Clara. "The night she died, she asked me to sit with her. I did. She held my hand. She said she felt like her body wasn't hers anymore." Clara swallowed. Wyatt's voice was raw now. "I told her she was safe, that I would take care of her." She smiled, said thank you, and then she just stopped breathing. Silence fell again. When he finally looked back at Clara, she didn't step away. "You didn't kill her," she said. "No, but I failed her." Clara stepped even closer, lowering her voice. "And who thinks you didn't?" Wyatt didn't speak. But the answer was there. Clara took a breath. "Is it Tessa?" "Partly." "Then who else, huh?" He exhaled through his nose, slow and pained. "Her brother, Everett." Clara blinked. Catherine had a brother older. Came back from the war in worse shape than he left. They weren't close. But when she died, he needed someone to blame. He picked me. "Why?" "Because I was the one who survived." Clara nodded slowly. Then after a moment, he left the note. Wyatt didn't deny it. "He's been in Helena," Wyatt said. "Off and on. Drifts in, stirs up whispers, then disappears again. I keep tabs when I can. But he doesn't want truth, Clara. He wants a reason to ruin someone." She looked down at the piano, at her reflection in the glossy wood. "I can't live in this house if I'm afraid of what's in its walls." "You don't have to be afraid." "I'm not," she said. "But I'm not going to pretend either." Her voice dropped. "If the truth is buried here, I'll find it. Because if I'm going to rebuild something with you, I need to know the foundation isn't rotten." Wyatt stepped forward then, not close enough to touch her, just close enough that she could feel the shift. "There's more," he said. "But not here." "Then take me there." He studied her. "You don't even know what I'm offering. Does it scare you some days?" She straightened her shoulders. Then that's where I want to go. That afternoon, they saddled the horses and rode north past the tree line into a stretch of land Clara hadn't yet seen, hills that rolled into flat bluffs carved by old rivers and colder wind. Wyatt didn't talk much, but his presence was steady, measured, like he was building the nerve to tell her something. The silence had held too long. They stopped at a grove of bare cottonwoods, the branches brittle against the winter sky. In the center of the grove stood a single wrought iron bench, black, weathered, half-covered in snow. Clara dismounted first. "What is this place? Catherine used to come here when she needed quiet," he said. "I put the bench in after she died. It's the only thing I built for her after the house." She stepped toward it slowly, sat down. The cold iron soaked through her coat, but she didn't move. She wasn't a ghost, Clara said, but she was fading. She deserved better, Wyatt said behind her. She had someone who stayed with her until the end. That counts for something. He didn't speak, but she knew he heard. They sat in silence, the wind threading through the trees. Then Clara asked, "What did you mean when you said there's more?" Wyatt hesitated. Then finally, "There's a letter she left. I've never read it." Clara looked over. "Why not?" "Because she addressed it to my future wife." The words hung in the air like frost. She stood. "Then maybe it's time we read it." Wyatt nodded once. And for the first time, Clara saw it, not guilt, not grief, but release. Like he had been waiting for someone not to forgive him, but to walk with him through the fire. They rode back as the sun dipped below the mountains. The letter was waiting in a small wooden box under the floorboard of his room. She didn't open it yet. But she would. Because the dead weren't asking to be mourned anymore. They were asking to be heard. The box was smaller than Clara expected. Old pine smoothed by time with brass hinges dulled to a copper green. Wyatt placed it gently on the desk in his study, hands careful, reverent. "It's been here the whole time?" she asked. He nodded. "I couldn't bring myself to open it. Not even once." "And you're sure she wrote it to your future wife?" She left it on her piano bench the morning after her final episode, tucked under the metronome. The envelope was addressed that way in her handwriting. Clara looked at the box. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. Not from fear, from something closer to inheritance. "Are you sure you want me to read it?" "I want someone to read it," Wyatt said. "And you're the only person who hasn't asked for anything from her memory." Clara opened the lid. Inside, folded carefully, was a single envelope. Cream-colored. No seal. The ink was faded but legible. "To the woman who comes after me." Clara inhaled slowly, broke the fold, and began to read. "I don't know who you are, and I don't know what you've been told. But I know this: if you're reading this letter, then Wyatt finally let someone pass the gate. That means you matter. And if you matter, then I need to tell you something I couldn't say to him." Clara's eyes narrowed. The handwriting slanted with urgency. "He tried. More than anyone will ever know. And I made it impossible. Not because I didn't love him, but because my mind became a place I couldn't live in anymore. You're probably in the house now. You've probably touched the piano. Good. Don't let it go quiet. It was never meant to hold silence. It was meant to hold me, and now maybe it can hold something of you too." Clara blinked back, a sudden sting in her eyes. Wyatt is not a man who forgets, but he is a man who forgives slowly. Be patient with him. He carries more than he says, and it's not all about me. There are things I never told him, things I never had the courage to say out loud. So I'm saying them to you. because maybe you'll understand. Clara's breath hitched as she turned the page. I was pregnant once. The room felt suddenly smaller. It didn't last. I lost the baby before we ever told anyone. And I think a part of me broke when it happened, a part I never found again. He blamed himself, thought he pushed too hard, thought if he'd been gentler, slower, the baby would have stayed. But it wasn't him, it was me. My body, my fears, my need to make everything perfect before it was ready. Clara looked up. Wyatt's face had gone pale. He hadn't known. She reached out and took his hand. I'm still here, she whispered. He nodded, but didn't speak. She turned back to the letter. I didn't know how to be a mother. I didn't even know how to be whole. But I wanted to leave this house with something other than silence. So I'm leaving it with you. If you can love him, not just the man he is, but the shadows he stands in, then maybe something of me will get to live after all. Clara closed the letter slowly. Her heart was a drumbeat in her chest. Loud. Certain. She wanted someone to free you, she said quietly. And maybe I was supposed to free her too. Wyatt sat down heavily in the chair across from her. His voice was hoarse. I thought I'd buried the worst of it. You didn't, Clara said. You just built walls around it and called it a house. He looked at her. Do you think less of me now? She shook her head. I think you've been grieving in place. And maybe this letter, maybe it's permission to move. Wyatt's eyes dropped to the letter in her hands. I never knew about the child. She didn't want you to carry that weight, Clara said. She carried enough for both of you. A silence settled between them. But it wasn't the cold, strained kind that had marked their early days. It was full, heavy, honest. I don't know what to do with this, Wyatt said. I feel like I've just met her for the first time and lost her all over again. Maybe that's the beginning, Clara replied. Not the end. She folded the letter gently and placed it back in the box. She asked me not to let the piano go quiet, Clara said. I won't. They sat for a while longer, hands occasionally brushing, no words necessary. Later that night, Clara returned to the music room alone. The moonlight spilled across the floor like a pathith. She opened the piano lid, ran her fingers gently across the keys, and began to play. Not to grieve, not to mourn, but to honor. The melody she chose was soft, winding something new, something hers. Wyatt stood in the doorway, unseen, listening, and this time he didn't walk away. He stepped into the room. Clara didn't stop playing, but her eyes met his as he moved beside her. He rested a hand on the piano top, looking down. I remember that night, he said quietly, when I found the letter. I didn't know what to do with it. It felt like a goodbye I wasn't ready to read. You were right, Clara replied. You weren't ready, and now... She slowed the melody, bringing it to a close. Now you're not alone. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of things neither of them could quite say, but both understood. And then Wyatt whispered the line that had haunted him for years. Grief isn't what broke me, Clara. It's what I clung to because it was the only thing I had left of her. Clara turned toward him. Then maybe it's time to hold on to something else. In the days that followed, something shifted at Langford Ranch. The air felt lighter. Rooms stayed open longer. Wyatt spoke more. Clara laughed more. And the piano, it sang daily. But not everyone welcomed the change, because as Clara stepped further into the space Catherine had left behind, And as Wyatt began to make room for something real, the outside world watched. And some people like Everett weren't ready to let go of the past, especially when they believed it owed them something. The package arrived 3 days after the letter. No name, no return address. Just a box the size of a small book wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with rough twine. Mrs. Hart found it on the front steps just after dawn. Clara turned it over in her hands at the breakfast table. Who would have left this? Wyatt didn't answer. He was already watching her too closely. She pulled the twine loose and peeled back the paper. Inside was a small wooden frame wrapped in cloth, a photograph, and beneath it, a folded page. She lifted the cloth slowly. The photograph was old black and white, blurred slightly at the corners. It showed Catherine seated on the piano bench, her smile soft but haunted. She was thin, visibly so, the veins on her hands dark against pale skin. But it wasn't the picture itself that made Clara's blood go cold. It was the shadow behind her. A figure. Faint. Standing in the hallway doorway. Watching her. Unmistakably Wyatt. She turned to the note. One line only written in jagged handwriting. Still think she died peaceful. Clara's stomach dropped. Wyatt reached for the frame. His face went still as he took it in. Not shocked, not confused, just tight, controlled. I remember this, he said. This was a week before she passed. Everett took it. Why would he send it now to rattle me? Is he trying to say you did something? Wyatt stood and moved toward the hearth. He's trying to make you think I did. Clara followed him, her voice low. Why now? Wyatt stared at the photo again. Because I finally let someone into her space. Because the house isn't quiet anymore. And he can't stand that. She looked at the image again. The way Catherine's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The way Wyatt hovered behind her like a ghost waiting to be named. And then she said it. The line she didn't want to believe but had to admit. What if the truth isn't that you didn't kill her, but that you didn't stop it? Wyatt turned sharply, hurt flashing in his eyes. I didn't know she'd given up, he said. Are you sure? He stepped back like she'd struck him. Clara's throat tightened. I'm not accusing you, she said. I'm trying to understand what you didn't say. What she couldn't say. There's something missing. In her letter. In the house, in all of this. Wyatt's voice was low. She made her peace in that last week. Played music again. Talked about the future. I thought maybe we were turning a corner. But maybe that was her saying goodbye. He exhaled, shaking his head. You don't understand. Then help me, Clara said, because if Everett's willing to send things like this, he's not going to stop until he burns everything down. Wyatt didn't speak, so Clara made a choice. I'm going to Helena. His head snapped up. Clara, no, I'm going to speak to him, not to accuse, to hear it all, from his side. If I'm going to defend you, if I am defending you, then I need to know what I'm up against. Wyatt crossed the room. You think I need defending? I think we all do, she said softer. From ghosts that don't stay dead. Helena felt colder this time. Not the kind of cold that bit, but the kind that settled in your collar and made your skin feel watched. Clara rode in with Silas, who'd returned to Langford Ranch that morning with news that Everett McConnell was staying at the Rustwood Inn just off Main Street. He's been poking around the governor's office, Silas said. Talking to people. Dropping your name. Wyatt's. Clara's jaw clenched. Then it's time we stopped being silent. She entered the inn with a confidence she didn't feel, coat buttoned tight, chin up. The clerk at the front desk recognized her name and pointed to a corner table in the attached cafe. Everett sat alone, nursing a black coffee hair unkempt jacket patched at the elbows. He looked like a man who'd once had everything and had spent the last decade trying to punish the world for taking it. He looked up as she approached. "Well," he said, leaning back, "the ghost bride in the flesh." Clara didn't blink. "You sent me the photo." "Did I?" He said, faux innocent. "Mail's a funny thing." She sat across from him. Why now? Everett's smile was cold. "Because you're starting to believe in a story that was always missing its ending." "I've read her letter," Clara said. "Did she tell you what really happened that night?" She said Wyatt stayed with her, that he held her hand, that she stopped breathing. She forgot the part where he watched her swallow a vial of laudanum and did nothing to stop it. Clara's pulse jumped. "You don't know that." "I know what the coroner didn't find," Everett hissed. "No signs of struggle, no notes left behind. But I found the bottle. Hidden. Empty." Clara's voice shook. "Why didn't you take this to the sheriff?" "Because I knew no one would touch Wyatt Langford," he said bitterly. "He built half the valley, employed the other half. No one wanted to see their golden son in cuffs. So you've spent the last 10 years sending anonymous threats. I've spent the last 10 years trying to remind people that grief doesn't make a man innocent." Clara swallowed. She was unwell. She was scared. Everett snapped. "She told me things, in letters, said Wyatt was slipping away, that she felt watched, pressured, like something was expected of her she couldn't give." Clara shook her head. "She never mentioned that." "Of course not. She didn't want to tarnish his memory or yours. She wanted someone to see the cracks. That someone is me." Everett leaned forward. "You think you're saving him. But what if saving him means silencing her all over again?" Clara stood. "I'm not here to choose sides," she said. "I'm here to make sure the truth doesn't get buried beneath guilt." Everett laughed. "Truth. In this town. Good luck." As Clara walked away, his voice followed her. "When it all crumbles, don't say I didn't warn you." Back at the ranch, Wyatt was waiting at the porch when she returned. She dismounted slowly, handed the reins to Silas, and walked up the steps. "I saw him," she said. "I know. You knew what he'd say. I knew what he thought he knew." Clara stared at him. "Did she take laudanum?" Wyatt didn't move. "Yes," he said. "But I didn't know until after. I found the bottle days later, tucked inside a stack of hymnals. I burned it." "Why?" "Because if anyone found it, it would have confirmed the worst. And I didn't want her remembered for how she died." Clara's heart cracked. "You let people believe it was peaceful." "She was peaceful," he said. "In the end." That was the truth I held on to. Clara didn't speak for a long time. Then, "You should have told me. I didn't want to lose what little peace we were building." She stepped past him, stopped at the door. "Peace built on silence isn't peace," she said. "It's denial in disguise." Tessa McBride wasn't surprised to see Clara. If anything, she looked amused when Clara arrived at the edge of the McBride estate, not dressed for a formal call, but in a plain wool coat, wind-tangled hair, and eyes that had stopped asking for permission. "You came alone," Tessa said, stepping onto the veranda. "Brave or foolish?" Neither, Clara replied. Just done waiting for someone else to give me the truth. Tessa raised a brow, the corners of her mouth curling. I assume this isn't a social call. Clara held out the photograph and the note that came with it. You knew Catherine better than most. I need to know what you think this means. Tessa took the photo, studied it without flinching. Then she laughed, dry, sharp. This again? You've seen it before. Oh, sweetheart. I took that picture. Clara blinked. What I was there that day, Tessa said, turning the frame slightly. She was playing the same 3 bars over and over. Looked fragile, almost translucent. I thought maybe capturing her like that would freeze time, hold something in place. She looks haunted. She was. Tessa looked up, but not by Wyatt. Clara stepped closer, then by what Tessa's eyes cooled. Regret, expectation, loneliness she never knew how to name. She handed the photo back. Everett found that picture a week later and twisted it into whatever helped him sleep. He always wanted to believe someone else was to blame. He said Catherine wrote him letters, said she felt pressured, that Wyatt was distant. Tessa snorted. Everyone was distant by then, including Catherine. She stopped coming to events, stopped writing back. When she did show up, she looked half there, like part of her was still home chasing ghosts. She wrote a final letter, Clara said, addressed to Wyatt's future wife. Tessa's gaze sharpened. So he gave it to you. He let me read it. She said she loved him, that she was fading, that she hoped the piano would keep singing after her. And did she mention the laudanum? Clara nodded slowly. No. Everett did. Of course he did. Tessa murmured. Because grief isn't enough for some people. They need someone to bleed for their pain. Clara hesitated, then asked, did Catherine ever say she wanted to leave? Tessa's jaw tensed, the first real crack in her polished calm. She said she wanted to escape. There's a difference. Escape from what? From herself. From being the woman everyone expected. From being fragile and beautiful and in place. Tessa stepped inside the doorway, motioning Clara to follow. She didn't hate Wyatt, she said. But I think she hated the version of herself she became in his world. The foyer was lined with mirrors and warm wood candles flickering in wall sconces. Clara followed her through a hallway into a sitting room filled with books and velvet armchairs. Tessa crossed to a cabinet, unlocked it, and pulled out a small stack of letters bound in faded ribbon. She gave me these 6 weeks before she died, Tessa said, placing them on the table between them. Said not to open them until she was gone. I never did. Why not? Because I was afraid they'd make me hate him. Clara's chest tightened. And now I think she wanted someone to see her honestly, not as a ghost, not as a wife, not as a tragedy, just as a woman who got lost. She slid the bundle toward Clara. You should read them. Clara hesitated. Are you sure? Tessa smiled faintly. No. But if you're going to carry the weight of her memory, you deserve to know how heavy it really was. Clara took the letters. The paper was soft, almost translucent. The ink faded. But the first line of the top letter burned like fire. I'm not afraid to die. I'm afraid of disappearing without ever being truly seen. Clara closed the letter slowly, fighting the lump in her throat. I don't know what to do with this. Tessa leaned back, studying her. You do. That's why it scares you. Clara stood. He should read them. Tessa arched a brow. Wyatt, yes. And what if he's not ready? Clara looked toward the door. Then he'll never be free. By the time Clara returned to Langford Ranch, the sky was already pulling toward dusk. Snow flurried in lazy spirals, catching in her hair. Wyatt was splitting wood behind the stables, sleeves rolled up, face unreadable. He didn't stop when she approached. "You went to her," he said without looking. "She had letters," Clara replied. "From Catherine." Wyatt paused mid-swing. The axe hovered in the air for a breath, then dropped. "She never told me she left anything with Tessa. She didn't tell you a lot of things." Clara held out the bundle. "But you deserve to read them." Wyatt stared at the ribboned stack as if it might catch fire in his hands. "I'm tired of guessing," Clara said. "Tired of walking through a house full of shadows. If we're going to build anything real, the past can't live louder than we do." He finally reached out, took the letters, ran his thumb over the top page like it might dissolve under his touch. "Did she blame me?" he asked quietly. "No," Clara said. She blamed herself for not speaking up sooner, for becoming someone she didn't recognize. Wyatt nodded once, then again, like he was trying to hold something together just long enough to make it inside the house. Clara stepped closer. "There's one line you need to read." She opened the top letter and pointed. "He saved me as best he could, but I was already drowning by the time he found me." Wyatt closed his eyes, just for a second. But it was enough to say everything. "I need to be alone," he said. Clara didn't argue. She just handed him the letters, kissed his cheek, and walked back toward the porch. Inside the house felt different, like something had shifted beneath the floorboards. Mrs. Hart appeared in the hallway, watching her closely. "Will he be all right?" she asked. Clara looked out the window where Wyatt now sat on the bench beneath the tree, the letters spread across his lap. "I don't know," she said, "but I think this is the first time he's trying." That night, Wyatt didn't come to bed. Clara didn't ask why. But just before dawn, she found the letters neatly stacked on the kitchen table, and next to them, his handwriting on a clean sheet of paper. She was right. I couldn't save her, but I can start saving myself. Underneath one more line, "Let's build this house without ghosts." The attic was colder than Clara expected. Dust floated in lazy spirals through the shaft of morning light that cut in from the single round window. She pulled her shawl tighter and stepped across creaking floorboards, fingers tracing the tops of old trunks and boxes, half-forgotten relics tucked away in a space meant to be ignored. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, only that something had been calling to her since Wyatt read the letters. A tension in the house, a hum beneath the silence. And then she found it, a locked drawer built into the side of an antique writing desk, hidden beneath a faded quilt. The key was still in it. Inside was a bundle of papers, crisp and yellowed, tied in a pale blue ribbon. Clara didn't breathe as she untied the bow. The top document was a legal draft, a will. Her heart stuttered. The signature line at the bottom was empty, but the name listed in the bequest line was not Wyatt Langford. It was Everett McConnell, and the house Langford Ranch was listed as his beneficiary. Clara staggered back a step, the air thick in her lungs. She was going to give the house to him. The paper trembled in her hands. Catherine had prepared this amendment days before her death. The date was clear. The lawyer's stamp faded but legible. She hadn't signed it, but she'd drafted it. Clara sank onto the old stool by the window, head spinning. Was it guilt, pity? A final attempt at reconciliation with her brother? Or something darker, a warning, a threat held over her by Everett, and why hadn't Wyatt known? She clutched the pages tighter. Because if this got out, if Everett had known, he'd have a legal claim to the house. Maybe not a strong one, maybe not a winning one, but enough to drag Wyatt through court, enough to turn whispers into accusations, enough to unravel everything they'd rebuilt. The door to the attic creaked behind her. She turned quickly. Wyatt stood there, coat still on eyes already knowing. I was looking for old sheet music, Clara lied. But he walked straight to her and sat down beside her on the bench. You found the will, he said. She stared at him. You knew. He nodded slow. I found it the night she died. She left it out on the desk, half covered like she hadn't decided what to do, and you didn't destroy it, no. I hid it. Why? Because it wasn't signed. And because I didn't want to know what it meant if she had. Clara's voice was low. She was leaving it to Everett. I know. Clara stood agitated. Then why haven't you told your lawyers or filed something to prevent him from contesting? Because I didn't want to make it real. Wyatt looked at her eyes raw. She didn't finish it, Clara. That has to mean something. Maybe she got scared, Clara said. Or maybe she changed her mind. But that paper still exists. And if Everett finds it, he won't. You don't know that. I know you're scared. I'm not scared, Clara snapped. I'm angry. Because this house, this life, it's finally starting to feel real. And if he gets his hands on this, it could all fall apart. Wyatt stood slowly, the floor groaning beneath his boots. Then we burn it. Clara stared at him. You want to destroy it. You want to live with it, hanging over us. She looked down at the page again. One signature. That was all that was missing. One inked name, and everything they had would belong to a man who wanted nothing but to watch it all burn. And then she said it. The sentence that turned the air between them to glass. What if she was going to sign it, and something or someone stopped her? Wyatt flinched. You think I stopped her? I think someone did. He shook his head. She didn't tell me about it. Not once. She didn't tell you a lot. That doesn't mean I was the one who I didn't say it was you. Silence. Thick, tense, uneasy. Then Clara stepped closer and lowered her voice. But someone knew. Someone who wanted this place. Someone who needed a reason to claim it. Wyatt met her eyes. You think Everett already knows. I think he's always known. She handed him the paper. We need to move it. Somewhere safe. Wyatt nodded slowly. There's a lockbox at the bank. I'll take it there tomorrow. Clara exhaled, tension loosening just enough for her hands to stop shaking. They stood there in the quiet attic, surrounded by the shadows of a past neither of them had chosen. And for the first time, Wyatt reached for her hand, not out of comfort, but out of partnership. Whatever happens, he said, we face it together. Clara nodded. I won't let ghosts make our choices for us. Later that evening, as snow began to fall again, Clara sat in the parlor with Tessa's letters, Wyatt's note, and the will locked in a chest by her sink. Mrs. Hart brought her tea and lingered in the doorway. You've stirred something, she said gently. Clara looked up. What do you mean, this house? Him. Yourself. You've gone looking for truth, and truth never comes back quiet. Clara offered a faint smile. Do you believe in ghosts, Mrs. Hart? The housekeeper tilted her head. I believe in regrets. And regrets have a way of staying long after the people are gone. She turned to leave but paused. Just be careful what you dig up. Not everything buried wants to stay that way. The next morning, Wyatt rode into town with the will hidden inside a sealed envelope. Clara stayed behind, trusting him to do what he said. But before he returned, a letter arrived, delivered by hand. No name, just the Langford Ranch crest carved into the wax seal. Inside a single line in Everett's now familiar scrawl, "I know what you found, and I know where it is." Clara's blood ran cold. She turned the letter over. On the back was a date, a court filing date, 2 weeks away. The courthouse smelled like old wood and older secrets. Clara sat at the back of the gallery, her gloved hands clenched tight in her lap, as Everett McConnell stood confidently before the judge, his lawyer flanking him with a smug kind of certainty. Wyatt hadn't said a word since they arrived. His jaw was tight, his eyes unreadable. Judge Halbrook cleared her throat and looked over the petition. "You're claiming verbal intent, Mr. McConnell." "Yes, Your Honor," Everett replied, tone respectful but practiced. "My sister and I had conversations, repeated ones, in which she made clear her desire to amend her will. While she never formally signed the document, she expressed in her own words that I was to inherit the ranch. And you have proof of these conversations," Everett gestured to a recorder already cued and labeled. A voice recording from 2 days before her passing. Clara's stomach turned. She hadn't known about this. Neither had Wyatt. "Proceed," the judge said. The courtroom went still as the audio crackled to life. Catherine's voice came through faint but clear. "I don't want the ranch to die with me." Pause. "He deserves to carry on something. He's lost enough." Clara's hands went ice cold. He. No name, no specifics, just enough ambiguity to give Everett the rope he needed. The recording ended with the sound of a piano chord in the background. Low, unsettled, Everett's attorney stepped forward. "We argue that this, combined with the unsigned draft, provides sufficient evidence of Catherine McConnell's intent to transfer ownership to her brother." Judge Halbrook nodded slowly. And the defense, Wyatt's lawyer, stood. "We maintain that verbal expressions without legal affirmation cannot override the original signed will, and that this recording is circumstantial at best, open to interpretation, and without legal context." The judge tapped her gavel lightly. "I'll need to review the recording and documents in full. Court is adjourned until Thursday." As the room emptied, Clara grabbed Wyatt's arm. "We can't let him spin that audio into a claim." "I know," Wyatt said. "There's something off about that recording." He looked at her like what? Clara shook her head. "I don't know, it just didn't sound like a decision. It sounded like doubt. Like she was talking through something." Wyatt's face tightened. "And if she was, then someone made sure we'd never know how it ended." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The house felt tighter, smaller, like the walls had heard the courtroom and were waiting for a verdict, too. She sat at the piano bench, fingers resting lightly on the keys. The melody Catherine once played echoed in her mind, slow, haunting, incomplete. 3 notes repeated. Always the same 3. Clara looked over at the metronome. It hadn't moved in weeks. She opened the compartment beneath it almost without thinking, and there, tucked in the corner, was a small recording cylinder. Her breath caught. Wax, marked only with a faint date 2 days before Catherine died. The same day as Everett's recording. She ran to Wyatt's study, heart racing. "Look what I found." He took the cylinder, eyes narrowing. Where was this in the piano? Under the metronome. Hidden. He nodded once, then opened the old Edison player he kept in the corner and loaded the reel. They listened in silence. Catherine's voice emerged again, more tired this time. Slower, like she'd been talking to herself. I thought giving it to him would fix something, but it doesn't. He doesn't want the ranch. He wants to win. Pause. A shallow breath. Wyatt doesn't know about this yet. Maybe he never will. Maybe that's kinder. Clara covered her mouth. But he deserves peace. And so do I. So I'll leave it unsigned. Let the house choose who it keeps. The cylinder clicked to a stop. Wyatt sat down slowly. She changed her mind. She chose you, Clara said, voice thick. She just didn't know how to tell anyone. Wyatt stared ahead. That recording changes everything. Then let's use it. The next court session was colder, tenser. Everett looked relaxed until Wyatt's lawyer stood and placed the wax cylinder on the judge's bench. This is a second recording, she said. Found yesterday. Hidden in the deceased's personal belongings. Same date. Same speaker. The judge raised a brow. Was it authenticated? It's genuine. We have an expert on standby. Judge Halbrook nodded. Play it. As Catherine's voice echoed again through the courtroom, Clara watched Everett's face fall. It wasn't just shock. It was fear, because the words were too clear, too final. She'd left the amendment unsigned on purpose. Wyatt didn't smile. He didn't move. He just reached for Clara's hand under the table. When the recording ended, the judge sat back slowly. This court recognizes the original will as binding. The verbal and unsigned drafts do not constitute a legal amendment. The estate remains in the possession of Mr. Wyatt Langford. Everett stood abruptly. This isn't over. But Judge Halbrook's gavel struck down. It is in this court. Clara didn't look at Everett as they walked out, but she heard him say it under his breath. She was supposed to choose me. And then louder, bitter, and final, you didn't win Wyatt. You just outlasted the ghosts. Outside, the cold was sharp and beautiful. Wyatt and Clara stood on the courthouse steps, the wind tossing her hair as the snow began to fall again. She left it all in limbo, he said quietly, because she didn't want to hurt either of us. But in doing that, Clara said she hurt both of you. He looked at her. Do you think she knew how much damage that choice would cause? Clara didn't answer for a moment. Then she said the line she'd been thinking since the attic. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who leave the biggest mess behind. Wyatt exhaled. It doesn't feel like a win. It's not, Clara said. It's a reckoning. They stood in silence for a beat longer. Then Clara turned to him. Come home. He nodded, letting the cold lift from his shoulders. But as they rode back to Langford Ranch, Clara couldn't shake the weight in her chest, because the truth had saved them but barely, and somewhere in that truth a part of Catherine still lingered, unfinished, unquiet, waiting. Clara found the letter inside the lining of Catherine's old shawl. It was stitched in, carefully hidden so precisely it might have never been found if she hadn't decided to wear it that morning while walking the ridge. The wind had been sharp, and something about the weight of the fabric felt like comfort, until the seam near her wrist split slightly and revealed the corner of folded paper. She froze. The parchment was brittle, sealed with wax that had long since crumbled. Her name was written across the front. Not to the next Mrs. Langford, as before. Just Clara. Hands trembling, she sat beneath the tall pine near the ridgeline and unfolded it. The ink was faded, but Catherine's handwriting, neat, almost hesitant, was unmistakable. If you're reading this, it means he gave you the shawl, which means he trusts you, which means I was right to leave it. Clara swallowed hard. I didn't know how to be a wife to a man who didn't need rescuing. Wyatt always stood so tall, so quiet that you couldn't see where he was hurting. And I wanted someone who mirrored my pain, not someone who challenged me to rise above it. A pause. Then, that's not his fault. It was mine. I wrapped my sadness around him like a blanket and waited for him to suffocate. He never did. But he stopped breathing just the same. Clara closed her eyes. If I signed that will, it was only to punish myself. Everett never wanted the ranch. He wanted the power of being the one left standing. I saw it too late. Clara turned the page. You will love him better than I ever could. Not because you're stronger, but because you'll meet him where he is not where you want him to be. A single line followed underlined. Don't make him carry my memory like a debt. Clara folded the letter slowly, pressing it to her chest. She sat beneath that tree until the sun began to dip behind the mountains, shadows stretching like old memories across the hills. Then she stood and walked home. Wyatt was in the barn brushing down a horse, his sleeves rolled to his elbows and flurries catching in his hair. He looked up when she entered. You okay? She nodded. I found something. Another letter, hidden in the shawl. He didn't speak, but his eyes darkened with the weight of everything that still lingered. Clara walked to him, reached up and placed the folded note in his hand. He looked at it. Didn't open it. I read it, she said softly. She told me not to let you carry her like a debt. He closed his eyes. I've been trying, he said. I know. She stepped closer, touched his chest lightly with her fingers. But I don't want to live in her shadow either. Or in yours. I want to build something new. He met her eyes. I'm tired, Clara. So am I. They stood in silence, not heavy, not broken, just still. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It wasn't new. The band was worn at the edges, the setting simple, but it was beautiful in its quietness. I found this in my mother's jewelry box last week, he said. She wore it when she first came to the ranch, said it reminded her of the soil, solid and patient. Clara's heart caught. I'm not asking for promises, Wyatt said. Not today. I'm just asking you to stay. She smiled, tears rising. I already have. He slid the ring into her palm. Then let's stop surviving and start living. Spring came slow to Montana, but when it arrived, it came in gold and green. The snow melted down into the earth, and the river ran louder, faster, like it had been waiting to speak. Clara reopened the music room. The windows were left open now, letting the wind carry in whatever it pleased. Wyatt planted new trees out back, fruit-bearing ones, things that would last. And Everett. He left. Not quietly, not gracefully, but finally. His last words, "You'll always be borrowing her ghost," hung in the air longer than they should have. But eventually, even that echo faded. Clara framed Catherine's final letter and hung it inside the piano bench under glass. Not as a warning, but as a reminder of what silence can cost and what honesty can save. One morning while dusting the bookshelves, she found the photograph again, the one Everett had sent. She studied it, really studied it. This time the shadow behind Catherine didn't look threatening. It looked sad. Like a man who hadn't yet learned how to stay. She tucked it into a box and labeled it Then, Because now was different. On the 1-year anniversary of Clara's arrival, they hosted a gathering. Small, just neighbors and friends. Tessa came in a sharp green coat and with a peace offering of blackberry jam. Silas brought a fiddle and played until his fingers blistered. Mrs. Hart made lemon cake. As the sun set, Clara stood by the porch railing watching Wyatt talk with a boy from town about fencing and irrigation. He laughed easily now. Not often, but when he did, it stayed in the air longer. Clara felt a quiet bloom in her chest. Tessa walked over and leaned against the rail beside her. "You saved him," she said, not looking over. "No," Clara replied. "He saved himself." "I just didn't leave." Tessa nodded once. "That's the hard part." They watched the sky shift from orange to soft purple. Tessa turned. "Do you ever worry it'll all come back, the ghosts?" Clara thought about that. "I don't think they ever leave," she said. "But I think they stop shouting when you start listening." And she meant it. The ghosts were still there in the way the floor creaked in the music room, in the hush between notes on the piano, in the scent of old paper and pine. But they were quieter now. Witnesses, not wardens. Clara took a deep breath, tasting spring on her tongue. She turned back to the house. Their house. Not a monument, not a mausoleum, just a home rebuilt from the wreckage of silence. And in that moment, she understood something Catherine had never said aloud, but had written between every line. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without fear. Clara stepped inside into the music, into the light, and the door closed softly behind her.